Hello, my name is Bret Refutation. I'm going to be refuting Justin Cow's claim. His claim is Schedule 1 restriction limits access to drugs for research purposes in the United States. He's referring to the drugs such as LSD, shrooms, and ecstasy specifically. And for his first claim, he says that some Schedule 1 drugs have been linked to treating psychological problems. He backs this up by saying he says how mushrooms containing psilocybin helps relieve symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorders and depression. He says that psilocybin is a hallucinogenic found in mushrooms and is not addictive, according to Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, who conducted the study of mushrooms in London. He doesn't really talk about the alternatives to the relief of symptoms of OCD and depression medications such as anafranil, Lovix, Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, and he doesn't really talk about how this certain drug is any different from them and how it is better for them. He doesn't talk about the long-term effects from these from the shrooms. The long-term effects are negatively affected, and they and according to drugabuse.gov, the mushrooms can cause respiratory depression and heart rate abnormalities and a withdrawal syndrome. He also talks about how the drug is not addictive, but just because something is addictive doesn't mean that it's not harmful. According to Brown's University Health Promotion page, specifically on mushrooms, it states, although psilocybin is not addictive, polydrug addicts may frequently abuse hallucinogens as well. And it also states that users with a history of mental illnesses should not take in hallucinogens, including psilocybin, because they can trigger or aggravate conditions like schizophrenia, mania, or depression. He also backs this first claim up by talking about how LSD alleviates end-of-life anxiety in patients with terminal illnesses. Talks about a study done. He says that it was done in 2014, but it was actually done in 1938. It was just released in 2014. Talks about the sets of patients giving 20 micrograms of LSD and the other set of patients giving 200 micrograms. Talking about how the patients that were given 200 micrograms were helped with the end-of-life anxiety. But according to WebMD.com, there are already antidepressant treatments that work, such as psychotherapy and antidepressant medications, so why is this drug necessary? It also has long-term effects, and there have been identified long-term effects of LSD. According to ProjectNo.com, the long-term effects of LSD include flashbacks, vision problems, delusional behavior, lack of motivation to participate in daily activities, lack of enjoyment in things that once caused pleasure, mood swings, inability to communicate well with others, irrational thoughts, schizophrenia, extreme feelings of depression, overwhelming feelings of anxiety, and more. He goes on to his second claim, and he says that Schedule 1 drugs have potential to update or create different types of medicine for illnesses that have no cures. He talks about ecstasy and it has anti-cancer properties. He doesn't talk about the already established alternative drugs, or no, he talks about he talks about how the alternative drug that they are studying with in the University of Birmingham, United Kingdom, how it may treat with leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, and he says that the alternative drug is 100 times more powerful than ecstasy itself, So that must mean that the long-term effects must be more powerful as well. The long-term effects include brain damage, affecting thought and memory, damages to portions of the brain that regulate critical functions such as learning, sleep and emotion, kidney failure, depression, anxiety, cardiovascular collapse, and death. And he also talks about that that the potential ecstasy modification can help suppress the development of white cancer cells, but it also kind of goes, the effects also go towards that. And also he states that as of now, the drug is too powerful and it can actually kill the patients. He then talks about how mushrooms can help people with alcohol or smoking addiction. He says that there was a study done where in Johns Hopkins University Medicine, the psilocybin was used to treat smoking addiction and received an 80% success rate in people quitting smoking. He doesn't even talk about the alcohol addiction and how, and any studies that actually help that. And then once again, going back to the long-term effects of mushrooms, they can cause respiratory depression, heart rate abnormalities, and a withdrawal symptom. And that concludes my refutation speech against Justin Cow, and I hope you agree that his speech had lack of evidence to back up his claim. Thank you.
All right, basically the first couple of points come down to this notion that there's not a discussion of what the alternatives are, and we have alternatives to these supposed drugs that are going to be beneficial if we did do research on them. So if there are alternatives, we don't really need to worry about that. That's the first part of your claim. And the second part of your claim is typically that the drugs that they are talking about using instead of the contemporary medications that are already approved have negative consequences to them. And that's, you make that argument on the mushrooms, you make that argument on the LSD. I thought that that was pretty consistent and easy to follow. When you got to the second point, when you're talking about ecstasy, it was a little bit confusing because it sounds to me like you're now talking about an alternative that is really a modification of the ecstasy that holds potential, not an alternative to ecstasy as a treatment. So because of the language difference there, that was a little bit confusing as to what the inferences were that you were making on that second point. I was confused at one point, so is it a good thing or a bad thing that it's 100 times more whatever effective or more dangerous? It wasn't quite clear on that point. Like I said, I think it's primarily because of the way you had the first part of the argument structured that led to the confusion in the second part of the argument. Let's see. I thought that you made some good presses against the information that the advocate's presenting, and I thought you did a good job presenting counter evidence on most of those points. That was pretty effective too. All right. Way too much reading. Thank you.